If you wanted an extra reason to avoid getting on the wrong side of the increasingly tyrannical British criminal justice system, British prisons are being taken over by Islamists who are forcing other prisoners to convert. Incredibly, it's not just the ginger ones. As I'll show, prisons are now a microcosm of British society. The Islamists are also threatening to kill people who are in there for being far right, aka British, or for speech offences, and anyone who's in there for terror offences is glorified by the other Islamists. So if you think it's good when a terrorist gets sent to prison that justice has been served, it hasn't. They're just claiming their benefits in a different place, surrounded by people who approve of their hatred. And of course they're attacking the prison guards. One of these attacks was carried out a few days ago by the terrorist Hashim Abedi, who plotted the Manchester Arena bombing that was carried out by his brother Salman, killing 22 and injuring over 1,000 mostly young British girls. After the bombing, British people were instructed, don't look back in anger, and we dutifully did that. We folded our hands between our knees and we waited obediently until the next sacrifice of our children on the altar of multiculturalism, lest we be accused of hate speech. Hashim is still allowed to be as hateful as he likes though. He's in prison, but prison is no longer a deterrent for Islamists. They run the jails like Pablo Escobar ran jails in Colombia. British prisons aren't keeping us safe. They're now a recruiting ground for Islamists and a holding pen for an Islamist army that's going to spill out sometime. Hashim couldn't wait until he was released to attack Brits though, and last week the religion of peace struck again as he attacked prison officers with 20cm homemade knives of peace and a pan of boiling cooking oil of peace, injuring 3 prison officers including a woman and leaving 2 with life-threatening injuries. Boiling oil like he's pouring it down a castle wall onto an ottoman with a ladder. Even this guy's weapons are medieval. He's now been moved to Belmarsh, a tougher prison where he'd previously attacked prison guards, and he's been given a spork. I'm not joking. This wasn't the first Islamist terror attack in a British prison though. In 2020, a British convert to Islam called Baz Hawkton carried out the first one at the high security Whitemoor jail in Cambridgeshire. Baz and his terror buddy Brusthoms Yamani crafted weapons and also made fake suicide vests like they're putting on a prison production of Team America. They attacked 3 staff members including a woman. Ziamani had written a 4-page letter spelling out his expectation of immediate martyrdom, suggesting he doesn't fully understand how suicide vests work. They have to be real. You can't just paint some toilet rolls black and duct tape them to your chest. Baz Hawkton, a white guy in jail who converted to Islam, isn't unusual apart from the fact he's got brown hair. Former inmates describe a brutal power struggle in several prisons between Islamist gangs and rival groups, marked by horrific violence. While such clashes have died off, it's not because the prison officers have managed to restore order. Rather, insiders say it's because the Islamist gangs have won the battle for total control of the prisons. As the balance of power has shifted in the Islamist favour, other prisoners are now too afraid to resist, and many are converting to Islam for their own protection. Even Andrew Tate did it. Prisoners who refuse to convert are beaten, and Islamic preachers are welcomed in prison.
Allah!
Former robber Aki Ayman is performing the Islamic call to prayer.
The happiest moments I've ever had in my life was in prison, because it was the closest I got to God, to finding out who I am. Some people have found their faith outside of the prison cells. I found it inside. That's what disciplined me, and that's what made me get through.
There's no suggestion that this guy is a hate preacher, by the way, but there's plenty of evidence of Islamic extremist preaching and literature in our prisons, sometimes by the prison chaplains themselves. The Telegraph interviewed Steve Gillan, General Secretary of the Prison Officers Association, who said, "It's a real problem, very complex, and it won't go away anytime soon. Some prisoners are intimidated into joining a gang. Others do it for protection because there's safety in numbers, or they think there's a status to be in a Muslim gang. They think you'll be treated better, always allowed to go to prayers on a Friday, for example, and have better food in the evenings at Ramadan." Funnily enough, the better food thing was in the Ray Winston Borstal drama Scum that I watched when I was a kid, and I've got to be honest, going to prison then looks a lot less horrifying than going to prison now. The numbers are pretty nuts. In 2002 there were 5,500 Muslims in British prisons. In a couple of decades that tripled to 16,000. That's 18% of the prison population, despite Muslims only making up 6.5% of the wider population in Britain. Well, official population anyway. Obviously we have millions of people here illegally and unmeasured. A A lot of bleeding heart lefties will say, well, this overrepresentation of Muslims in prison is clear evidence that the system unfairly targets them. Is it though? Or have we just imported cultures that are more violent and criminal? I don't see any Shinto Buddhists being overrepresented in the prison population or trying to hack people's heads off. Only around 160 of these 16,000 Muslims are actually in prison for terror offences, but the other Muslim inmates don't seem to spurn the terrorists. On the contrary, they celebrate them. The Telegraph interview a former inmate called Ryan who was sent to Belmarsh in southeast London. It's a high security jail with a large population of terror offenders, including Axel Muganwa Rudakabana, the Welshest choir boy of all time, who stabbed little girls to death last summer, leading to lots of British people getting locked up for being angry about it. Ryan says that terrorists acted as a magnet to many of the Muslim prisoners at Belmarsh, who make up almost a third of that prison's population. He said the terrorist prisoners were the ones that everyone wanted to congregate around. A lot of people will look up to them as they look at them as a second prophet, as a god. In Belmarsh, they put them in with normal prisoners, so guys convicted of drug offences, GBH, alongside a terrorist. This is where the issue stems from. A new guy comes in, and over the space of 6 months or a year, they've befriended him. These guys turn from convicted criminals into extremists. And former prison governor Ian Aitchison also warned of the dangers that Islamic extremists could pose in jail. What we saw were environments where all the ingredients for radicalisation were there, he told the House of Commons Justice Committee almost a decade ago. A number of high-profile Islamist extremists and terrorists in prison are actively proselytising the Islamist ideology and have the capacity to do so around other prisoners who would be susceptible and vulnerable to that ideology. Another former lag interviewed by the Telegraph is Gary, who served a long sentence at a number of jails across the country and says that Islamist gangs have now established a foothold in the 6 Category A high security prisons, as well as several others. He says they are feared. They pretty much run the prisons. A lot of them have merged with the drug gangs. Being able to sell drugs and accumulate wealth is a very powerful thing in the prison system. And he describes how some prisoners are pressured into joining Islamist gangs, while others who are prepared to convert are welcomed in, even sex offenders. Gary explains, in Islam, if you convert, all your previous sins are washed away. The Muslim gangs stood by that principle for people in prison for sex offences. It fractured the culture of the prison system. I was there watching it for years on end. It was obvious it was going to turn into a big problem. This is a real change in British prison culture. Sex offenders have always been seen as the worst of the worst in prison. When my mate was in prison for football violence, which is hardly even a crime, it's just grown men arranging a consensual fight between each other, well, when he was in, the nonces were kept completely separate from the rest of the prisoners because everyone wanted to smash their heads in. Now they're accepted into the Islamist gangs running the prisons. What a surprise. When people say diverse cultures give us unique perspectives, I guess this is what they mean. And do you know who else is in Belmarsh prison alongside terrorists like Hashim Abedi and Axel Muganwa Rudakabana, the Welshest choir boy that ever was? Tommy Robinson. Tommy's crime was to show a documentary film that the court had ordered him not to show, making him in contempt of court, which is a very, very serious crime apparently. Tommy is kept in solitary confinement. It's not in case he gets out and shows a film to another prisoner, by the way. It's for his own safety, because the Islamists who run the prison will kill him. Although maybe that's what the authorities want to happen. As jailed Soviet dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, the state used imprisonment as a tool for eliminating inconvenient people, not just punishing crime. When the government was rounding up rioters and dissidents in the wake of last summer's riots after girls were stabbed to death by Axel Rudakabana, a journalist warned that people sent to prison for tweets would be at risk from Islamists inside.
And people are being told that if they do appear, whether they're pleading guilty or not guilty, they're very unlikely to get bail. And if they do end up in prison, somebody who told me, somebody who knows about these things told me that, you know, any right-wing, far-right protester landing up in jail, they can expect a pretty cold reception from what he says are Asian gangs inside prison who will be looking out for them.
Just as on the outside, the state uses Islamists to subdue and demoralise native Brits.
Both got put away for the riots, both been put in the same prison, both been put in the same cell. In the last 48 hours, the wing that they put them on was 90% Muslim. Both of them, one's been attacked in the shower, they took the shower heads off, battered him. When he managed to get back to his cell, his other mate had been completely battered as well. The family's obviously distraught and everything. They're making targets of them, as well as like examples of them. They're making targets of the lads. They did some damage to them as well.
And across jails, solitary confinement units designed to hold Islamists are instead used to keep other prisoners safe from Islamists because there are too many of them and they run the jails. But why does Tommy get a can of tuna slid under his door while a terrorist who plotted to kill little girls at a pop concert, which in my culture is one of the worst crimes in history, is allowed access to a kitchen and metal for weapons and pans full of deadly boiling oil just because he wants to make some falafel? Who even deep fries stuff anymore? I've never deep fried anything and I'm Scottish. What's wrong with them just having a toasty machine or a bowl of cold gruel? It's supposed to be a punishment. And prisons have always been a place where the prison guards turn a blind eye to some things, and some have made money on the side smuggling things in or out, but this seems to be getting worse according to Fraser Nelson on Newsnight.
So you now got governors who basically are struggling to control their own prisons. I was in a prison recently having a look around, and I was absolutely amazed to find two things. One was the signs on the wall begging the guards not to sell mobile phones to the prisoners. The guards, you know?
Wow.
And I couldn't believe, I thought they were aimed at the guests. No, this is the problem with the guards.
Yeah.
And one of the staff told me that they think that a good number of the guards are actually sent in by organised crime gangs to train as prison officers. Within a relatively short period of time, you're then in a prison, and the governor doesn't even have control over who gets to be a prison officer or not. So when you see this dislocation, and the way that various private companies are doing little bits of the prison to the extent where the governor doesn't really have control.
Possibly this is because prison officers in the UK now fear being beheaded, and if they intervene and they're not beheaded, they can also get accused of Islamophobia, the worst crime in the public sector. As friend and colleague Nick Dixon said, our prisons are now essentially Arkham Asylum at the moment before the Joker breaks out. Where will this lead? France is already at the next step. This week, gangs attacked a number of prisons in France with machine guns and Molotov cocktails, allegedly to break out the Muslim crime kingpin Mohamed Amra. French Justice Minister Gérald Darmanin said attempts have been made to intimidate staff in several prisons, ranging from burning vehicles to firing automatic weapons. The French prison population is at 120% of its capacity, and Muslims are vastly overrepresented in that population. And Syria shows what happens when you get to the next stage with the breakdown of social order and government control. There, Islamists overran the prisons and freed other Islamists being held there. In the months that followed, these Islamists slaughtered the Christian, Druze and Alawite minorities in Syria. There's a great push for diversity until the Islamists have the upper hand. In Britain, we have around 40 to 50,000 Islamists on terror watch lists. For context, that's about as many people as the British Army has ready to deploy. Our government does everything it can to appease the Islamists and silence their critics, but as they grow in number and power, at some point, will they overrun the prisons and release the 16,000 Muslim men held there? So you can see why prison isn't a punishment or a deterrent for Islamists, not just because they've seized control of wings and set up Sharia courts and run the drug trade and make money, but because Hashim Abedi's 55-year sentence will be null and void when Islamists reach a critical mass and overrun the prisons. British laws clearly need to change. Our laws and criminal justice system are designed for British people. We're applying them to an imported alien medieval culture. Rupert Lowe, a politician with the Reform Party, well, I think he's still with the Reform Party, it's hard to tell with all the drama, has a simple and effective solution.
So the first thing we have to do is start, obviously, with the foreign criminals in our prisons. They need to be deported. We need to then, anyone arriving here illegally needs to be detained and deported. And we then need to have a program to deport those people who are here illegally.
Anyway, thanks for listening. If you want to support me making these videos and join a growing community of the only sane people left in the West and get access to all my content and live streams and stuff, then you can sign up to my Patreon or chuck me money for a beer while beer is still legal in Britain. There are links below. Okay, thanks for listening. I've been Leo Kears. Bye. Bye-bye.